Okay, so I'm Danny Berman, aka Red Rackham, and welcome to this workshop for, it's basically a track breakdown of my remix of Lock Up by Zero B. And the first thing I wanted to talk to you about was the original track. It was released in 1991, and I was just going to share my screen with you and show you the Discogs sort of listing, just so you can see how sort of seminal it is. Can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. Okay, yeah. So it was released in 1991. If you look up here, see it says have 2,400. Bearing in mind, this is the original pressing. So on Discogs, I don't know if you know the rule, but usually it's 4.5 times as many that have it. So if something says 2,400, that means over 10,000 people own the record, usually. I mean, it's hard to say, but if you do it with my Wonky Bassline Disco Banger release, I know how many that sold, and it is quite accurate, you know? So basically, this is the original pressing, but as you can see, it's been repressed many times, you know, and it's also been bootlegged heavily. So I was just going to play the original track just to give you a blast. Hey! And can you still hear me? Yeah, brilliant. You know, it's old school breakbeat rave, I guess you'd say. And this is the famous bass drop. So yeah, I just wanted to give you guys a bit of a blast on that. Basically, the thing that surprised me about it was it's actually not that fast. It's 130 BPM, which I think gives you an insight. If you think this is 91, by 1993, 94, breakbeat music was getting more towards 150 BPM. So the early proto-jungle stuff was basically getting up to 150, 160 BPM. So that was my first surprise on it, and I just wanted to show you a video, if that's okay.
I just started going out and doing these big raves, you know, just playing my keyboards and making this music. It was very hedonistic. Well, you know, there was a lot of drugs involved. I won't say there wasn't. You know, there's lots of different influences coming in, and it was just taking all that and putting in this kind of warehouse style. And it was just kind of making stuff in my bedroom, coming back from these big raves, kind of spending Sunday making these tunes, much to the detriment of my neighbours, I would have thought at the time. So there's a blast from the past. Lock Up was made in my bedroom in my parents' house. So I had a little sort of setup in the corner where I had the W30 and these things in a rack. It was just lots of buffeting in the bedroom, really. So just hours and hours just playing around, just trying to get the presets you wanted. Hands in the air bit, I was going to sort of warehouse parties like Butterloggy and stuff, and it was trying to find the sounds. It would sound amazing in that space and go, ooh, what's that? You know, when you heard it. So, and that kind of still works today, I think. W30, yeah, this is kind of the boy in its day. Amazing machine, used by the Prodigy, used by a lot of old school artists, really. And I think my dad was the guarantor. And I bought it, and he was like, "Why do you want to buy a car or something? Why am I guaranteeing a keyboard?" I was just like, "I need this. This has got to be in my life." And I knew I wanted the sound of kind of Chicago, and I wanted that Detroit techno sound. When this came along, I could then just lift those sounds individually from records. I could get the right kick drums and the right snare drums and start making tracks. You're very limited, and I think that limitation is that's where the sound comes from. That's where the old rave sound comes from, definitely. I mean, the actual tune lockup, I'd used the studio just for the DAT machine because I didn't have a DAT machine. And there's 4 tunes on an EP.
So I'll just stop that now.
So I had these other discs.
But I just wanted to give you guys a bit of a sort of background of it, you know. So that guy Bill Borres, he made Lockup using pretty basic equipment in '91, and then it's been reissued and, you know, remastered and repressed many times. So that track basically was obviously a seminal rave classic. In 1991, I was listening to Cypress Hill in a Scottish fishing village and, you know, smoking hash. So it unfortunately passed me by, shall we say.
Me too.
I was, kind of annoying actually that, you know, like my friends from the south of England were all going to these amazing warehouse parties and raves when they were 13 or 14 or 15 or whatever. And we were literally going down by the sea, sitting around a campfire and, you know, maybe, you know, getting on it a bit, but, you know, basically having a tape machine or an acoustic guitar. I mean, bloody hell. So it was quite different. But I remember there was a club called the Resurrection in Scotland, and it was really famous, and people called it the Res. And I remember seeing people at school on Monday, and they looked like they'd seen a ghost and they'd been dragged through a hedge backwards, you know. I literally saw people and they were just like, and they'd be like, yeah, he was at the Res. So, you know, that had sort of a mythical kind of status for us, you know, that sort of thing.
I know that feeling, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, basically what I wanted to talk to you about was just that when I started to approach remixing this track, I would say that not being familiar with it, as I wasn't, because I was in a Scottish fishing village listening to Cypress Hill, I think that was actually an asset for me. And I think when you're asked to do big tracks to remix them, like I've done a few which were quite well-known tracks, you know, and I think something that was a benefit for me was that I didn't really know the originals, because I tend to not really know big tunes, you know, like Move Your Body or Can You Feel It, or, you know, I know Big Fun and Good Life, but, you know, like some of those real classic dance tunes, I couldn't actually tell you what one is. I mean, I think Can You Feel It probably is actually not even called Can You Feel It. I think it's I'll House You. But, you know, when it goes to these big classics, I don't always know them. So Shadow Child contacted me and said, can you remix this track for this reissue? And I was like, yeah, cool, no worries. Quite a few different people hit me up and were like, oh my God, you're remixing Lock Up by Zero B. I wish I was remixing it. And, you know, can I have the parts and stuff like that? I'm just sort of looking at the chat, by the way. Should I ignore the chat? It's a little bit off. But by the way, I just want to say, folks, this is my first ever group Zoom. So thanks for joining me, and please understand that I'm a little bit nervous and there might be some teething problems and stuff, but it's great to have you all here with me. So yeah, I just wanted to take it on to next, the parts really. By the way, how experienced is everybody here with remixing? Has anyone here done a remix before?
Yeah.
So do you understand how it works with a remix in terms of what usually happens, the process to add the actual, I mean, do you know why remixes exist? Anyone?
To please more, you know, a bigger audience, maybe a different audience.
Yeah, kind of. That's not a bad answer.
I suppose for me, it's like to raise the profile, your own profile, by getting bigger artists to remix your tracks.
Yeah,
that's seen by a wider audience.
That's a great answer as well. They're trying to get as much kind of out of the music as they can. They're trying to kind of extract as much kind of traction and audience as they can. So if you look at a lot of things, like the remixes basically are so that it takes it to, like, for example, Red Rackham remixing Lock Up by Zero B. There's some people that follow me that are going to be interested in that remix because they want to hear what I've done with it. It's about bringing in a different audience often, you know, and trying to make, like, you must remember all those pop songs, probably, well, not everyone will remember them, but in the 90s or the 2000s, they would have house remixes done by really famous house producers of, you know, pretty terrible pop songs. Like, I mean, have you heard of Simply Red? Yeah, I mean, Roger Sanchez used to get paid, you know, 15,000, 20,000 to remix Simply Red.
Masters at Work.
Master at Work's a good remix, actually.
Yeah. Masters at Work. I've got so many. They must have made millions in the
And
90s.
they are good. Some are really good.
Yeah. But so has anyone here done a remix before?
Not officially, but yeah.
Okay, so you're familiar with the parts?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Get the
right.
steps.
So yeah, the parts are basically usually either a bounce of the whole track, right? So it's the length of the track, and what you do is you solo every single channel and you bounce out the full length of the track. And that's usually the nicest thing, but some people are lazy. And what they'll do is they'll just basically bounce out like one kick drum, you know, one snare, and you end up with just a few little bits. And I hate that because I really like to start with their original track, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like putting all the stems like on top of each other and then going from there, really, if I'm doing it.
Yeah. So
I presume that's less prevalent nowadays, though, with Ableton be able to, extracting the entire thing in one go. You normally get the whole stems, would you not?
yeah, well, I don't know if I've just been really unlucky, but I've had stuff before where they've literally just bounced out
One
a
kick.
bar of kick drums, a bar of snares. Seriously, you know, I remixed the Joubert Singers' "Stand on the Word," which is a really famous gospel disco track, in 2008, and all I got sent was the original track, right, and a thing called the clapapella, which was when they recorded it in the church. They played the song through speakers, and then all the choir sang, and they basically recorded the choir, and you can hear the music quietly in the background. And that was all I got, and I was supposed to do a remix of that track. So I've had some pretty mad experiences before remixing stuff. I've launched my Patreon, so I'm going to be doing it monthly. So it's basically going to be artist development, music production stuff. I'm also going to be doing live producing, so I can basically stream while I'm making tracks. Are you guys familiar with Discord?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've made a Discord server. So basically you can share music and I give feedback. And then I'm also going to be doing live feedback sessions where we do a Zoom chat like this. People send the music in and we listen to it. And then I'll give some advice and feedback, and other people can as well. So I'm trying to make it as interactive as possible. My whole idea with the course is I want to empower other people to remain independent, because everyone seems to be saying, oh, I want to get on this label. I want to, I need this, I need that. And I'm like, you've already got what you need. You just need to do it. You know what I mean? So I really want to support all of you. And I want to sort of give you the benefit of my mistakes as well as my wisdom. I've learned a lot along the way, but I've also remained the same person, if that makes sense. And that's not easy, and that's something that I want to try and promote for all of you as well, is to not lose yourselves in the music industry. Some of you might not think it's going to happen. You might not think you can do it. Some of you might be about to do it, but it is a road that can be a little bit treacherous, What I decided to do, which is what I always do, if I zoom out on it a bit, I just slap the whole thing. So if I go along here, you can see these are just all the parts. So I just slapped the whole thing into the arrangement. And I also didn't change the BPM. So because I normally make house music, which is about 124 or 126 BPM. And I just wanted to there's a couple of reasons why I didn't change the BPM. I didn't want to time stretch anything if I didn't have to, because I wanted to keep the sound quality of the original sounds, because they're straight off a Akai sampler, I think. So they really sounded nice and solid. And then the other thing was just, I personally wanted to make something that was the same tempo as the original, because I felt that was a nice reference to the original. I wanted to make something that people that liked the original could also play, or would mix well with that. So I'll stop it there and I'll go on to the later parts later. But basically every single thing that I'm using there is from the original track, really. All the audio. I used an Amon, right? Which, are you guys all familiar with the Amon break?
Yeah.
Do you know what it's from?
It's
a track by the Winstons, and it's called Amen Brother. And the drummer basically does like a mad drum break in it. And that was the basis of all drum and bass and jungle, basically, was that break. So I had an Amon on my computer and I wasn't happy with it. So this is a very Bristolian thing. I borrowed an Amon from my neighbor. I live the opposite, like where my back garden is. On the other side of the back garden is another street, because I live in a terrace house. And the guy that lives there is called Optimistic. His name's Jack, and he's a jungle producer, like a proper good jungle producer. So I was doing this remix, and I went to see him, and I was like, yeah, I'm not happy. Like, that's my original Amon up there. If I can unmute it, I think that's my original Amon. Just to hear it now, see what it sounded like. Unmute that. See if there's a big difference. Yeah. So the one that he gave me was really, really well engineered and really powerful. And we actually sat there in his house, and we just basically, he kind of like did some compression for me and like sort of made me a few nicely engineered Amons, which, you know, I could show you once I get off Logic. But basically, I wanted to use the Amon because I really felt with this kind of breakbeat tune, with the way it's kind of flowing, it's perfect for slamming the break in, you know? It's as a DJ would do. And I don't know if you're all familiar with this idea, but I often produce my tracks in, like, I imagine what I would do if I was DJing in a club, and then I do that on the track. Has anyone else ever thought about that or have that kind of mentality? Yeah,
I do the same. I start my tracks like from a DJ's perspective.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at it strictly from a kind of cutting perspective. I really, I started out as a hip hop DJ, so I'm really into doing cuts. Obviously not with everything, I mean, but I love having like an absolute, you know, when you got your tune going full pelt, and then you just cut 4 bars in of another tune and then back in. And if you do it right in a club, it's super impactful. So I often do that on my tracks. You know, I'll just bring in something and then take it out really quickly. But if we look at the actual track, what I've got here, all this stuff is from the original track. So the hats, really nice, you know, why wouldn't I use them? And then the kick drum I used was actually just the break. There's like a drum break, which is here. So, yeah, this is just from the original track. So all I did was I just cut the first kick, and I do that a lot. I try and use people's parts, you know? So if you listen to just that, it's just the, I mean, it's not even very well cut up, really. I mean, did I even do fade outs on it? It doesn't actually look like this is where it's so funny when you look at your engineering and you're like, did I do no, I didn't do fade outs. Hey, there you go. Sometimes if you do that, by the way, and you don't do the fade outs on the parts, it sounds fine, but then when they master it, you'll actually hear it because they turn the tops right up, you know? So my kind of mentality with this tonight is to sort of show you guys that it's not some, like, you know, rocket science. It's just pulling things together and making them work. So for example, this dreamy sort of stuff that I played in on the MIDI here, it's just a kind of little ravey noise, isn't it? But it really works, I think. Just a little answer, you know, to the call and response, you know. And then here I did another thing. I think it's even the same sound. By the way, if you're wanting to make things work with a part, this is my hot tip. is just copy the part onto a separate channel and play something differently in with it, or slightly engineer it differently, instead of trying to have everything on one channel. I really find it works, rather than trying to play it on the same channel. If you've already got something going on and then you add something, I don't know, it's just psychologically. You know, I just basically move stuff down onto a different channel, and then sometimes put a different effect on it. So obviously on that one, I've put a delay. Yeah. And then here, I've sort of added something else that's a bit sort of topical. And these are just kind of pretty basic sounds that I found that I think work in the kind of context of the tune. So if you listen to it with the more... And then for the bass line, I just use this Sculpture synth, and it's my trademark kind of, you know, bass with the reverb on it. Anyone got any questions, by the way?
So you have to be really careful when using reverb on bass, or you're quite liberal with it.
Well, if you listen to the track with the bass on, you don't really even hear the reverb. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I guess without that on, it wouldn't sound
Kind
so
of gives it an atmosphere, doesn't it?
It's definitely more straight with the reverb off.
Yeah.
Makes it sound very subby.
Yeah, well, I tend to use reverb, I either use reverb on a bass when it's a super lead kind of thing, right? So if it's like, you know, a Morris Fulton style, you know, wonky bass thing, and that always sounds great. But then with this, I actually think it sounds really I think that bass works because it's like a kind of mellow feeling. And what I was trying to do with this track was to do a dreamy breakbeat house remix. That sort of music has been quite sort of fashionable over the last, I mean, I remember I did this probably last February or something like that. So, you know, the trends change quite quickly. This is the other thing that I would say is your job as a remixer, is to actually make a remix that people who are buying records at that time are going to buy. You know what I mean? Don't make something that's like out of fashion. And I know that sounds awful, but all the remixes that I've done since this remix have all had breakbeats. I've all done kind of breakbeat jungle house kind of stuff. And there was two reasons for that. One is I'm sort of bored of making just straight house. Do you know what I mean? I found that I wasn't able to excite myself if I was just going to, you know, if I was going to do a house remix. And to be honest, if I'm making my own house music, I'm much more confident, you know, because I know this is my style, this is what I do. But if you're trying to make like a house remix of a remix, you know, I kind of feel like there's more pressure on me to make the engineering really brilliant and stuff like that. Does that make sense? Like, I feel more pressure to deliver a banger. And with things like breakbeats, I just really found that for me, being able to cut them up, and I'll get to the breakbeat part of the track. Basically, for me, it was really liberating to get access to these amazing parts. So I think over here, I think this is the breakbeat here, I think. Yeah. Right? So this is the original breakbeat from the track. I chose not to use the ding because to me that takes it into a more sort of commercial territory. It's a bit cheesy for me. That sort of James Brownie kind of, it's a bit kind of big beaty. And I wanted to keep it as a sort of stripped down kind of more, you know, wavy breakbeaty kind of thing. So if I put the tune on. So what I did on the breakbeat is I kind of cut it up, and I created my own new break from it. So if you listen to his version, very straight, and then with my one, it's nothing drastic, but I And then I did some reverse. So when I was starting to use it on the track, I didn't want it to be too complicated. I wanted it to come in and it be kind of like palatable. But later on the track, I made But then later on the track, when the bass line comes in here, I thought it was an opportunity to make the breakbeat a bit more hardcore. So if I play the track, I kind of cut it up more, as you can see. And this is where, who's cut up breakbeats here? Anyone?
Yeah.
It's super exciting because you can change the position of everything. You can, you know, so if you listen to this, it doesn't really make sense, does it? Count one to it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That's the fun of breakbeats. So can you hear how the cymbal is really pulling it together? If you listen to it without, it just sounds mad. But with the hi-hatting over the top of it, it makes a lot more sense. So my advice to you guys is, if you're going to use things like breakbeats or complicated drum programming, you can totally do it as long as you have something really steady anchoring it. So either the kick drum, you know, because obviously I've just used a straight kick drum here over it. And that anchors as well. If I zoom out on the track as well, look how little there is actually going on in it. Can you see how many parts there are? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts in the whole tune at that point. Has anyone else made much? When you're making tracks, how minimal do you make them? Do you have like 10, 12 channels or 20 or?
Normally go like way over the top and then have to strip it back
Mm-hmm.
and strip it and keep on stripping it back because less is normally more, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, same.
Few things I've learned over the years is it's much easier to mix down a track when there's hardly anything in it.
Yeah.
Are you guys familiar with submixing? Have you done any submixing before?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Submixing is where basically you would use send, and you send you basically bus like all the drums just to one channel.
Right.
So like overdub?
Well,
I've not heard it called submixing before, but yeah.
yeah, well, for me, I call it submixing. I mean, you could just call it bussing, but the reason I mean it's submixing is because you're doing a mix on the drums and then you're sending that just to one fader, and then you can also mix with the fader, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Your goal is to literally have 3 faders, you know, like drums, bass, synth, and then it's so easy to mix. If you think about it in terms of like, you know, those really expensive amplifiers that just have a volume on them, like the less control you have over things, the easier it is to get the levels really right, you know. On this track, I wanted to use that pad thing, the famous kind of, where is it? It's the kind of euphoric kind of rave sound thing. Here it is. But what I I wanted to do with it was I wanted to make something a little bit more, you know, me. So when you've got a long held sound like that, you can cut it because the front note is the note, you know, it's like you can cut it into small pieces. And basically what I did was I just basically put a delay on it. So because you've got the kind of, you know, main notes, they're happening at the front of it. So I wanted to give it, my sort of idea with this is to sort of show you that really you can actually do something with the parts, that it's the same parts, but you can actually add your own little sort of spin on them. So not rocket science. So, I mean, that's kind of like the main areas of the track explained. Yeah, as you can see, I've used a hell of a lot of the original track. Only the green parts really are new, and that's the MIDI that I played in. Does anyone have any questions?
So Daniel, when you remix tracks like this, do you work anything with like parallel compression, you know, EQing? Or do you just trust the original, you know, stems?
Well, it's interesting because normally I do use parallel compression, but for some reason I didn't on this. And I know it sounds mad, but I might have actually forgotten, you know? I'm a producer that is all about feel. So I'm more concerned with the musical content often than I am with the engineering, as you can see. So for me, I do sometimes try parallel compression. I mean, yeah, it does seem to be on this track actually. There, yeah. So yeah, there is parallel compression on it. If I solo, but it's only that break. Oh, sorry. So yeah, the drums. Basically, the drums have got parallel compression on them. So if I take that off, it's more soft. Is everyone familiar with parallel compression or not? Yes? No? It's often called New York compression. And it's basically to turn the transients up, if that makes sense. So it makes the front of the sound louder. So it's really nice actually for, you know, I just usually run my drums for it. So all it is, it's a really, really heavily smashed out setting on the compressor. So if I turn the mix up, you know, hardcore setting. But I tend to mix usually between 4 and 7% in. It depends, you know. But but that's pretty much all I've done to this, really. I mean, you know, what's the output saying? If I go to the master output, yeah, there's an EQ on it. Yeah, that's probably just so that I can analyze it. Mastering, right? It's not the answer, but if you mix your tracks sort of sensitively, then the mastering can improve on them. If you make mistakes in your track, if you make bad mixing errors, the mastering might try and reverse that. It might try and help that. But in the end, it's also going to affect other areas of that frequency in the track, you know? So for me, with what I'm doing, I tend to be very tame with my mixing, and that can sometimes be a mistake. My kick drums are normally not very loud, but, you know, basically I try and mix things so that there's something for people to work with, if that makes sense.
Yes, I was going to ask about kind of mixing down. Do you kind of do that as you go, or do you wait? Or
I
do you
do it as I go.
standard as the end?
No, I don't do it at the end.
So would you start with an anchor point, say you kick drum at -12, and then build around that to ensure all your levels stay level, or
no? Let's.
How would you go about kind of keeping all your levels?
If I open up something
appropriate
that I'm
as you build things up?
basically something that I'm working on right now, if it'll play. Let me see. Yeah, that should be cool. Just to give you an example. There you go.
Yeah,
That's it.
Yeah, this is something that I'm writing right now, and I don't think it's possible for me to work on something without the mix being right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I get the mix right
doing that myself.
immediately. You know, like I never change. Like I never change. Like so the mix on this. I mean, it's not like the most amazing mix in the world, but it's working for me. Do you know what I mean? So I tend to get the mix right immediately, if that makes sense.
So you don't have to go around reducing all the volumes to get a pre-master at -4 or at the end, or
you should, but no, maybe I'm terrible, but I just make sure that it's not peaking. Like I usually have my music so that it's going into the red on 0, and then if I'm gonna get it released, I just basically turn I'll put a gain on every single channel, and I'll do like -5 just to so I save my
that's
mix.
exactly what I do. Yeah.
Or I just turn the stereo out down. But I mean, the mastering guys that do my stuff have. When I was in Germany, I did get people emailing me a couple of times. The German guys saying like, you know, your engineering is totally wrong, and you know, stuff like that. But don't worry so much about the technical side of things. Worry about the music. The music is much more important. Remember, you can pay somebody else to do the mix down for you as well. You know, it's great to have full control over what you're doing, but I would say the music is far more important than the technical engineering side of things. I mean, a lot of what I'm working on these days, I'm not making music with even a record in mind. I'm just making it because I enjoy making music. It can be quite liberating to do that, you know, rather than to be like, I've got to get this absolutely everything. I did over 50 one-to-ones, you know, starting with my mentoring stuff. And I got so much consistency from the people that I was talking to. Was always engineering. And, you know, when I was younger and doing music, no one really cared about the engineering. It was just all about the tunes, you know? And if you look at the music that's fashionable right now, the sort of holding hands, kind of shiny, you know, Nathan McKay, whatever, it's incredibly precisely, nicely, shiny engineered. And also a lot of the stuff that's around, you can tell it's being made by loop packs, because I'm like, wow, that person's first record, and it sounds like it's been mixed by, you know, the guy who, you know, mixes down for like Pharrell. You know, if people are making a record and it sounds absolutely brilliantly engineered, but the music's really boring, that usually means it's off loop packs, you know? Because, yeah, I mean, so I would say, honestly, to really focus on the music rather than the engineering, you know? Because engineering is just like technical stuff. It's just like sort of, you know, painting a house or something like that, you know? Whereas it's a different skill to design a house. So anyone got any questions? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, well, that last sentence was pretty interesting for me. Yeah, I wasn't really thinking about it in that kind of way, because I'm always trying to make a more polished sound. I think you said that in our one-to-one as well. I'm always trying to make a more polished sound, and it probably takes away from the actual raw like energy of a song to do that, to make it more to make it sound better. Whereas the actual emotion of it is probably more important than that.
I credit all of my, you know, I wouldn't say success, but my progress in music, you know, all of it really It's about, you know, influences. It's about being absolutely absorbed and excited and blown away by the greats, you know? So really, most of the time, I don't really hear that many producers coming through who are unknown, who really blow me away, you know? But, you know, Fritz Wentink was probably one of the last people that I really was, you know, wow. I think Sweely's pretty good. I mean, it depends what you're into. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm pretty out of touch these days. Because when I used to do my radio show, I used to do a radio show every 2 weeks for about 10 years in the 2000s. So from like 2005 to, you know, I don't know, 2000, wasn't 15, but 13 or something. I was on it, you know, I was getting so much. I mean, you know, I still get sent all the promos, but nowadays I just don't listen to them, you know? So I feel like there's such a kind of wave of music. It's sometimes about being really clever about what you choose to listen to, you know? Don't waste your time listening to a load of kind of fodder, you know? Try and listen to the cream, you know?
Yeah, no, that's definitely a problem. There's so much like new stuff, and I think it's within everyone who's into music to go out and try and find new music, but then you can often get bogged down with just like commercial cookie cutter crap, and it's difficult to I find it really exhausting sometimes just to like find like good music that I will like the week after.
I think in this culture that we're in right now, I think it's about really moderating and actually, you know, like kind of being a gatekeeper with yourself. I know that sounds a bit mad, but
yeah, no, it's important to like try and figure out something that works for you. Yeah. And my thing at the moment is just not listening to any promos for like 2 months and then going back and then looking at looking over stuff that I've been sent ages ago, because then if I still like it, then it might be all right.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyone else got any thoughts, any questions about remixing, anything that they want to share about, you know, their experiences of producing and stuff like that? It's really interesting to hear what you all have to say. I've been talking for the last hour, so.
What about?
Can I ask you, Danny, for how many hours did you work on this remix?
Let's have a, if I have a look.
Like just.
I would say probably a rough estimate. I'd probably say it probably took me about 3 or 4 days, but that's not like a full day.
Yeah.
I'd say probably the original, the main idea, like honestly, I always go with my first idea. So the idea takes me 10 minutes, you know, it's like, this is the problem I have with producing, which is why I sometimes don't really complete things. Don't know if you're all familiar with this idea, but it takes me 10 minutes to make the whole tune in my head. But the problem is it takes me 4 or 5 days to actually get to that end point. And I know that that end point is possible, but sometimes I just can't be bothered to get to So for me, it's like the idea is so fast and I find it quite frustrating and stressful. You know, like, I don't know if you've ever felt like that, where you're really under the cosh, you know, where you've got to do another 2 days of like, you know, cleaning out toilets and, you know, like kind of, you know, chopping down, you know, with a machete, some kind of bushes and, you know, all that kind of stuff, you know.
I feel like I give myself a time limit on stuff like that. So I'll give myself, like, if I start something, if I don't start to like it within like 4 hours of like continuous work on it, then I normally just bin it.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing helps. I think it stops me going wasting even more time like trying to make something sound good. But I mean, I have gone back to stuff like once or twice and been like, yeah, that's okay, I'll try and make something out of this bit. But yeah, generally I go by that rule.
Yeah, well, I've had remixes where basically, I mean, there's a few where I was really not happy with what I did, you know, and it's funny how those are the ones where I always ended up kind of, I really regretted it, you know. And it's funny because they're not usually the big money ones. It's weird with the big money ones, they just want a Red Rackham remix. So pretty much as long as you make a dance tune, they just accept it. They don't really care, you know. You're just that person for that like day, and then the next day they're talking to someone else who's exciting for a major label, you know what I mean? But I found with the smaller labels, sometimes the sort of lower paid jobs where they want something for their money. Like they're really like, hey, if we're going to spend the money on this remix, we want something that is going to be, top of the Beatport charts or some shit like that. And
Yeah,
I'm
that's
always
what I
like,
agree with.
guys, like I'm not that guy, like,
I find remixes like sometimes a bit stressful because you're trying to think of as to whether you're putting enough of your own spin on something, and then you're trying to work out what your sound is. I mean, what do you think of that? Is that something you've experienced?
I always try and use the parts. So if the parts are shit, then you're fucked. I think it's interesting how when you can't use the parts, like when there's nothing to use, like that's when I always end up hating it. I'm like, man, I hate this. It's rubbish. It just sounds like a sort of banged out kind of just club tune, Whereas for something like, the Zero B one, or I remixed Adam Scrimshire recently, and I that was brilliant because there was like amazing vocals and stuff. I'll give you a quick blast of that. April, May this year. Sounds like someone's mic's on. So that's an example of, like when that was like after about 3 hours, I was like, I've got it. I mean, obviously I had to do the work, but I was just fully confident that I could produce that. And so anyway, look, we should probably call it a day, folks, because it's 9:15. But has anyone got any questions? I mean, feel free. Any thoughts you want to share?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, mate. Much appreciated. Very good.
This is how I feel.